Yes. And you raise the unconscious. Again, one of the things which you and the other authors that we've talked to recently all emphasize is that the unconscious isn't some great sort of dumpster where all the little the bits of the day that you've thrown away because they're rotten or useless land and fester. It's not that. That actually you have this nice phrase that it's a sea of all of you, and that it knows much more of you and your possibilities than the smaller you that marches around during the day. And that was a nice inversion.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned two intellectual heroes for me, both Bob Stickle and Mark Solms, amazing researchers. And they are both people that really changed our way of thinking about dreaming in the past, say, 20 years. And the ideas they corroborated, they defended, and it's also related to my work and many others. This is all rooted in psychoanalysis, in Freud, and also in Jung. Jung has this beautiful phrase that says that the dream prepares the dreamer for the following day, right? So if you have this huge collection of memories of the past, and you're able to put it to work so as to generate insight into the future, this gives you a tremendous advantage in terms of adaptation. And in psychoanalysis and in analytical psychology, we're able to rescue this perspective in the Eurocentric world, because this perspective was never lost among Native Americans, among Aboriginal people in Australia, among many peoples in Africa or in Asia. But in the Western world, in the scientific tradition, at some point, and I would say perhaps starting with Descartes, suspicion about dreams became prevalent. Of course, everybody knew in the antiquity that dreams can often be wrong. They're often wrong. But the fact that they can be right, or the fact that they can produce information that can be used to prevent certain outcomes, this got lost to scientists in the 20th century. And all the combat made against Freud and Jung had one of the bad consequences of this combat was the really not looking to dreams as what they are, and basically saying we can explain them away by talking about rapid eye movement sleep, by talking about brain, electrical oscillations in the brain or whatever. I mean, basically to try to reduce the dream experience to some biological explanation. And this cannot be done because dreaming it emerges from biology. And the work of Stickle is particularly important to demonstrate that when you dream about solving a problem, you become better at solving the problem. This has been measured, and it's being published, 11 years ago, but the public at large doesn't know about this. And Solms has also shown very clearly work done in the year 2000, published 20 years ago, 21 years ago, that you cannot reduce dreams to REM sleep. They're different things. Dreaming goes on during REM, but it's not REM.
Yes. Yeah, and it gets back to those three ways of thinking, induction and deduction. That's what Western science has focused on, to the extent of, as you say, trying to explain away the third kind of thinking.
Absolutely.
And that's such a strange thing to do, to have. It's like the part of the brain that likes doing inductive and deductive reasoning, trying to shout down the rest of your mind. And as you say, dreams can be right, dreams can be wrong, but in a way, is that the important thing? Because they give you something to wonder about.
Exactly. They give you stuff to process. They give you stuff to discuss. They give you ideas. And then you can use your waking rationality to sort them out. But to say, I don't want to see it, I don't want to have it, I don't want to remember my dreams, I pay no attention to them, I sleep too late, I wake up too early, I drink alcohol and I lose my ability to have REM sleep, and it's fine. To think that it's okay to spend 20, 30 years not remembering dreams, and that will have no consequence for your emotional life, for your social life. I mean, it can't be so. The more we know about sleep and dreaming, the more we we discovered that we need to do more of it, more of both.
Yes, yes, because you say, what is the future of dreaming? Is there a future for dreaming? And obviously, you feel that if there isn't a future for dreaming, there's probably not much of a future for us either.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. The robots are coming. We need to sort it out before they come.
Yes, yes, and it is. I suppose it is getting past this notion that, well, dreams can be wrong, but
yes.
So what?
Yes.
I mean, you know, the making a fetish of things being right, yes, as opposed to being fertile. Fertile is weird, because we were talking about this before we came on air, that the old-fashioned phone book is correct 100% of the time. But I don't think anyone's ever been inspired by reading it. Whereas a book that might be 80% wrong, if it inspires you to have a new thought, like a dream that might be mostly incomprehensible, but somehow it gets you thinking, that's more important than something that's right, like the phone book, surely.
And I think it has to do also with the place that people occupy in the work chain. Most people are not paid to be creative. Most people are not paid to be inspired. And now that the robots are taking more and more jobs, we really need to dream what the future will look like. And we need to come up with, you know, what will be the arrangement in 20, 30 years? If we continue the way we're going with just induction and deduction, we're going to end up digit. This is what most people will be. Most people won't have a place in a society that just keeps accumulating and accumulating, and that doesn't need people to be creative. Now, we know that we tend to be most happy when we are creative. So, and most jobs are becoming obsolete. So we need to think of a future in which people will be able to dedicate themselves to pleasant, creative activities. And to say that this is impossible is lack of imagination, is lack of a dream, lack of a vision. Everything is possible. I mean, we can achieve amazing things with the technology that we have now. And if there was better distribution of wealth, but not just material wealth, immaterial wealth as well. Why is it that so many people are anti-vaccine? Well, most people do not have the basic knowledge about biology to have an informed decision. And so this is a problem that we need to address: inequality, not just of wealth, of material wealth, but of immaterial things. The kind of knowledge that scientists have nowadays is so specific and so advanced that pretty much everybody in the world is excluded from particular fields of information. And how are we going to deal with all that if we don't have a state of mind that allows for loose associations to be tried? Because as you say, you know, if it's fertile, you can have 10 possible scenarios, and you look at them and say, one of them is quite precious, and that's quite valuable. And this is what dreams allow us to do. Dreams are not the only way of achieving that.
Well, that's what I wanted to go on to, because you talk about the fact that REM sleep and REM is not the same thing as dreaming, but you also touch on daydreaming.
Yes, yes.
That's another place where the same underlying mental neurological functions are involved, and it's an important thing, daydreaming, isn't it?
Totally, totally. All the innovation that we have, all the cultural innovation either comes from night dreaming or daydreaming. And they, as you mentioned, these are processes that share the same neural basis. If you look at what are the brain regions that are activated when we have rapid eye movement sleep, these are pretty much the same that are activated when we are having daydreaming, mind wandering, producing new ideas. The so-called default mode network is this collection of brain areas, a circuit of brain areas that are involved in producing those narratives. And this is also important from the point of view of empathy, because these are the brain areas involved in imagining the minds of others and putting ourselves in their shoes. So it's all quite linked. When our ancestors were having dreams that said, oh, I had a dream with let's say, our great grandmother that died, and she gave us advice. This was taken quite seriously. And it was taken quite seriously because the power of sharing this desire of doing something, let's say close the south entrance of the cave, for example, because we've got a warning that we might be attacked. the fact that people believed in those encounters with dead ancestors gave tremendous social power to those dreams. When we get to the written record and we see that many of the major buildings of the antiquity were inspired by dreams. For example, the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx comes from a dream that a prince had that if he was able to clean it, he would become a pharaoh. And archaeologists have found that indeed it was cleaned and a wall was built around it around the time when this story comes from. So we need to basically use this power towards social change. And now we have a tremendous abundance of not just financial capital, but technological capital, human capital. So in fact, if we were able to dream the right arrangement for society, we would be living in a very good world, in a world of prosperity. The fact that we are not going that way is a warning that we need to change our approach towards these problems. And the fact that psychoanalysis and analytical psychology were considered throughout the 20th century by science as charlatanism, as something that was not even to be considered and talked about, I think really was a disservice to the introspection, let's say, of our minds.
Yes, and introspection is something that anyone can do. I mean, it's not like you have to have a certain salary to be able to think of your own dreams. And is it in some way that it's when the mind pays attention to itself, which I think is another phrase that from the book, that we just, is it stepping back from yourself, or is that the wrong?
So if we think of the structure of the mind, most people believe that their mind is equal to their conscious mind. And as you mentioned before, in fact, our conscious mind is a very small fraction of the entire mind. Most of the minds, the vast majority of what's going on is latent. Is sub-threshold. You can't access, right? For example, if I ask you to please remember the name of your first friend in school, can you please do it? Mm-hmm. Did you think about that friend today or before?
No.
Probably not, right? It's something that was there for many, many years, but it was very easy to find. So it was unconscious, and then it surfaced to your conscious mind because I prompted it. Now, if we think of the structure of the mind, we need to also acknowledge that it's not just that it has a conscious aspect and an unconscious aspect, but it also has to do with different characters. Inside our minds, we have thousands of different characters, people we met, people that we read about, fictional characters, animals that talk, all kinds of stuff that compose our experience. And these are the creatures that we encounter when we dream, the creatures of the mind, the imagos in the Jungian terminology. And science has basically tried not to deal with that at all. And most people are not aware of that at all. So we are not ourselves. We are a collection of people and creatures and imagined creatures that we dealt with. And these are those creatures that our ancestors used to develop ideas, to do it with them. So, for example, if we look what happens among the Xavante in the center of South America, very ancient Native American population that have a very strong dream habits. They come to a place at the center of the villages every morning to share dreams, and they use those dreams to guide not just individual paths but the collective path. They will look to dreams as a way to obtain information about the future, to obtain new names, to obtain new songs, as a treasure trove of cultural elements, and very cherished. But they also have an attitude towards dreaming that is quite different from the attitude in the contemporary Western world. They don't wait to be struck by the dream. The dreams are not something that prey on them. It's the other way around. They try to hunt dreams. They try to chase dreams. They try to propitiate dreams. And this is exactly what ancient Greeks and Egyptians would do when they, for example, went to the temple of Apollo to ask for a dream that could, for example, provide a diagnosis of a disease and indicate a treatment. So this notion that if you have your mind set on a problem, you will have a solution to the problem is something that is so widespread in human culture that is actually quite surprising that we lost track of this in the past, say, 500 years or so.
It's interesting. I made a film some years ago about people who hear voices, and these are high functioning people. And it overlaps with what you're talking about, because they were very clear that there were other people in their heads, and said something which you have in the book, which is they said to me, these other people, they have thoughts I've never had. They know things and they tell me things that I didn't know. And it was a fascinating thing. And I talked to a mathematician, a very high functioning mathematician, worked in industry for 40 years. And she told me all her good ideas had been given to her by this voice. She says, the voice tells me the solution, I then work out the details. And he said, it's made me a good living. So this notion that there are parts of your mind which are not you.
Not you. They know different things. This is very clear in religions that deal with incorporation of entities, many African traditions, for example, like Candomblé, Umbanda, Lucumi in Cuba, for example. And this was the standard mode of obtaining ideas in the past. This is what people did. They talked, and recently, I mean, Ramanujan was getting some of most of his most impactful inspirations from the contact with his goddess, direct contact with a goddess, right? In quite graphically, in blood, you know, the constructions that he would come up with were written in front of him as a perceptual reality, an inner reality, of course. I think that it's in the Western tradition, we lost track of this knowledge. This is old knowledge, that we have these beings inside us. But I like, for example, to mention, I mentioned in my book, the word of Rodrigo Quiroga in Leicester University that has been showing for 20 years now, that if you go to the human hippocampus, a brain region that is involved in the formation of new memories, you find neurons that have a very specific response to particular characters. Not to a certain aspect, a certain, image, but to, for example, any profile of Mark Hamill, with or without costumes of Luke Skywalker, will be activated, but not, say, Emma Thompson or Homer Simpson. So the fact that we have neurons that are quite specific for those characters gives a neurobiological substrate to the notion that we have in our minds many creatures. These creatures have been formed by experience. They, of course, they're not that person. They are the representation of that person with all the filters, with all the, and of course, much poorer than a real person, but still quite complex, and that can provide you with advice or knowledge that is not available to the conscious ego. And I think this is where, when we understand that, it becomes clear that to not establish a relationship with those characters is, in fact, an impoverishment of the inner life.
Yes, I mean, it's one of those things where I was just thinking to myself now, whether what my dad would think about you. My dad died 5 years ago, but I know what he would think about you. But that can't be because I've looked up a memory, because I never knew about you and he certainly didn't know about you. So in some sense, there is a version of my dad still in my brain, and I can consult him and say, Dad, what do you think of Sidarta? And he'll go, I think he's very interesting. I think you should talk to him more about Julian James. Now, that was my father telling me that, not me.
I'm glad you bring up Julian James, because he suffered in a way what Freud and Jung suffered. He was bashed by too many people that never read him. Of course, I'm not saying that I agree with all the ideas that he put forth, but I think that first, many of those ideas are testable, and they have started to be tested in the past, say, 10 years. But second, and this was a discovery from myself in the 90s when I read James for the first time, that if you allow this dialogue to happen, if you imagine yourself talking to your father, he will talk back.
Yes,
you'll hear something faint coming, and for people that believe in spirits, they say, "Oh, this is evidence of the spirits." But for people that have a more materialistic view of the world, It's so easy to understand. It's that representation that has a life of its own, that is able to interact with.
That's the key thing. It's not a puppet that you're pulling the strings. It has
No.
Exactly. And for those who don't know, hold on a second. We're mentioning this person, Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which is, you know how the Vatican has a list of prescribed books that you may not read. So does science.
Yes.
It's one of science's dirty little secrets. That's one of them.
I don't.